The FBI and the Department of Homeland Security are refusing to testify before Congress. We know there are terrorists in the country. There's a new president coming in with a huge border change initiative. To help me go through all this, I have Charles Marino. Charles, thank you so much for joining me today.
Good to be back, Stephen.
So just some background. Charles is a national security expert, writer, and author of Terrorists on the Border and in Our Country. Chuck, what are your thoughts on President Biden suddenly giving Ukraine permission to attack deep into Russia? They're now delivering them landmines. Don Jr. is saying he believes Biden is trying to set the world on fire before Trump can get back in office. What are your thoughts on this big breaking story this week?
Well, I hope what you just said is not the case, and that this falls in line with the historical incompetence that we've seen the last 4 years from this administration, who just can get nothing right when it comes to foreign policy. You know, Bob Gates, the old Secretary of Defense, I think nailed it when he spoke about Joe Biden's career in the federal government. And that is, the president has just never been right throughout his entire career on matters of foreign policy. And as president, he has lived up to that quote from the former Secretary of Defense.
Yeah. He has many confused. Now they're saying, okay, where's the order? What was the thought process behind this? They want FOIA requests. I don't know that we'll find out until after he's out of office, but it seems very bizarre to poke the Russian bear and provoke a larger escalation at the same time that Trump is having phone calls with Zelensky saying, let's rebuild your city and stop the death, and telling Putin, we don't need to start a world war. Let's stop the death of Russians. What are your thoughts on Trump trying to get this thing to de-escalate?
Well, first of all, the decision-making process is one that I think needs to be addressed, and I haven't heard spoken about much. We are officially in a transition period between presidents. It is not uncommon during this transition period for any major decisions that are made by the current president to be run by the president-elect for consultation. And it does not appear to me that that consultation took place. So you now have an incoming president in President Trump, who is caught off guard, was not asked to opine on whether or not this was strategically the right way to go by the current administration. And so this was a unilateral decision. It may not have been a decision by Joe Biden. There's been a lot of questions as of late, who's actually running the White House. We know Kamala Harris hasn't been engaged. We know President Biden has been very limited in terms of his decision-making capabilities and articulating policies. So, you know, it seems as though the whole process has come off the rails here. So I think those are fair questions. Who's made the decisions? Where is the paperwork trail on these decisions? And who ultimately gave the order to allow Ukraine to do this? Because there really was no significant lapse in these weapons being given to Ukraine and Ukraine using them. It was almost immediate. And this goes way beyond what you would expect a lame duck president to be doing with a new administration coming in. This is certainly not setting the Trump administration up to come in and have some time to catch their breath and re-engage Russia and Ukraine on their own terms.
Yeah. I don't know if you ever saw the Netflix series House of Cards, but President Frank Underwood, you know, he's losing the election and he tells his wife privately, you know, we're going to have to turn to chaos in order to remain in power. And he slams his fist on the desk. It almost seems like that. I remember covering the election, the presidential transition 4 years ago, and it was Trump fighting on behalf of the American people with Congress to get them a stimulus check. And now we're fighting on whether to have World War III. And now the United Kingdom is saying, we're going to give more weapons and permission to attack Russia. Germany's saying, we're going to give permission to use our weapons to attack. It's a scary situation. Let's come back to the homeland for a minute.
Sure.
It's very common, Chuck, for the Department of Homeland Security and the head of the FBI to do a final year briefing on terrorism, situations at the border, within the country. Well, now Alejandro Mayorkas and Christopher Wray of the FBI, they're refusing to testify before Congress. Why would they do that? Is it just because of this transition? Is it because they just don't want to interact with Congress? What are your thoughts?
Well, it truly is unprecedented. As you said, this has gone on for many, many years to give the American public and Congress, but primarily the American public as the audience, a general threat briefing on the ongoings of the world and the impacts on our national and homeland security here at home. We have a lot going on both fronts, as we were just talking about. And the American people deserve, as taxpayers, to understand how all of these events going on abroad and within the country are impacting their safety and security going forward. Now, as far as the excuse of we'd like to do this briefing behind closed doors in a classified setting, there's always been two types of briefings that are given. There's the public and there's the behind closed doors. So I don't understand why the one that had to be put to the side was the one for the public. The public is acutely aware of what's going on around the world, and they know that things are not good, especially when we start talking about here at home. We know that our homeland security has been sacrificed with this border crisis significantly. As a result, we know crime is up, and we know that we just finished a contentious election with an incoming administration, and that the political divisiveness, unfortunately, remains very high here in the country. We also have homegrown threats here in the United States. So, this is a time for government officials to read in, if you will, the American public, to make sure that they're active in their own safety and security. And the only way they can do that is if they are a well-informed public. I remember when I oversaw the implementation of the National Terrorism Advisory System, which replaced the old color-coded threat system back in 2011. And the reason why we went to NTAS, as it's known, is because we thought the Department of Homeland Security had matured enough to actually be able to provide information to the public that would be beneficial. And that is, what are the ways that they and their families could remain safe dependent on a particular threat? And obviously, the current FBI director and Secretary of Homeland Security don't see it that way. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. I mean, I don't want to jump the shark, but like my first thought is like, what are you guys hiding? Like, what questions do you not want to be asked on camera? That's where my mind goes first.
It's what the American public is really looking for from them is their analysis, if you will. This is almost like an open book test to a certain extent. With media coverage the way it is these days, it's kind of hard to shy away from hearing about what's going on around the world. So I think from that macro level, the American public is informed. Are they well informed in terms of what these threats mean to them on a daily basis? That's the part where people like the FBI director and Secretary of Homeland Security are needed to come in to say, look, this is how this impacts the global threat environment. This is how it impacts the threat environment specific to the United States. And this is how we see it impacting the daily lives of Americans. And it's unfortunate, like I said, that they're not going to get to hear that analysis from what are considered to be experts in the national and homeland security space.
Yeah. The American people were told it was okay that Biden was giving away so much of their hard-earned taxpayer money to Ukraine. because it would lead to peace and that money would be paid back. Now, yesterday, the White House has Biden filing paperwork to forgive $4.75 billion in loans to Ukraine, while at the same time authorizing the release of another $400 million of taxpayer money. Why would they forgive Ukraine, let them off the hook, and then send them more money? That it is. Everyone is starting to feel like this is a money laundering scheme. I guess I don't understand it.
Yeah, this is what caused the American public to lose confidence in the Democratic Party, quite frankly. They viewed Kamala Harris, and rightfully so, as a continuation of the Biden administration. Her fingerprints are all over this as a part of the administration as vice president. So the question is, again, back to the point that we were discussing, who's making these decisions? Who's making these recommendations? These are now cover of the darkness decisions, whether it's the munitions, whether it's forgiving debt. What other horrible decisions are going to come out of the Biden administration before he finally leaves office? So Congress needs to keep an eye on this. And if there needs to be some type of limitations placed on further actions that the president's allowed to commit to with respect to Ukraine or other significant policy decisions, then they need to move, and they need to move quick, because the clock is ticking on the end of this administration. So they're going to try and get in as much as they can. And we also see that in the area of immigration too, where they're trying to solidify many of their inept, horrible policies and decisions that they've made the last 4 years.
Yeah. Okay, you are a security expert. You do consulting. What changes do you believe that Donald Trump and his team are going to bring to the border in order to stop the flow of illegals and then to get at least the criminals gathered up and out of the country?
So 3 fronts, as I see it. Expect the Trump administration to restart international negotiations and involvement with those countries that are along the primary migration paths. And that begins with Mexico. As we know, one of the prime programs that was in place was Remain in Mexico, an extremely effective program that basically created a pause in asylum claims where migrants were not being freed into the United States while they awaited immigration hearings 5 to 7 years from the date that they entered the country. This actually allowed asylum claims to be fully vetted by the U.S. government and then grant entry if verified. So expect diplomacy with Mexico, some of it tough. As we know, President Trump likes to negotiate using the power of the purse. We give a lot of money, primarily with Mexico via trade. They're our #1 trading partner. And we also give a lot of aid to those other countries along the migration path in the Northern Triangle, et cetera. This is where you saw the Merida Initiative under former President Bush 43 and continued by President Obama be very successful, because it was a carrot and sticks approach. It basically said, these are the benchmarks that you need to meet, whether it was removing corruption in institutions, free and fair elections, whatever the case was, and they were rewarded with the continuation of this financial aid to their countries. The Biden administration had no such thing. So essentially, it was turned off when Trump left the first time. Biden did nothing internationally, failed. 94 executive orders in the first 100 days related to immigration and border security were torn down by Biden, even though we knew they were quite successful, including programs like Remain in Mexico. So there will be a restart. There's a new president in Mexico that replaced AMLO. And so a continuation of his policies, Obrador's policies. But I think you're going to see some tough diplomacy from President Trump to get these countries to be part of the solution because they're not securing their southern borders to many of these countries. along the path to the United States, and that needs to change. Now, as far as internally here in the United States, I think we're going to see a fast shift back to law and order. You're going to see agencies be allowed to do what they're mandated to do. CBP is going to be back in the business of enforcing the law. Their days of processing as many people as they did under the Biden administration, that's over. You're going to see ICE be allowed to conduct interior enforcement. We hear about the deportations, for example. This is not going to be mass deportation. That's not realistic. 10 to 15 million people and trying to go out and find everybody just does not work. There's not the resources to do that. So the way I would anticipate they're going to start, and they've already started talking this way, is they'll prioritize it. They'll go after the national security threats, the criminal threats, the gangs, the violent criminals, and they'll prioritize them for removal and then go down from there to visa overstays, people that fail to show up for their immigration hearings, etc. I also expect the Trump administration finally to come down hard on sanctuary cities. We hear a lot from the leaders, the political leaders of sanctuary cities, talking tough on this issue, that they're not going to participate or they're going to stand in the way. The fact of the matter is they have no power in this situation. They really are just fomenting their aggravation and their intent to harbor these criminals and suspected terrorists in their cities. And we've seen the results of that. So what I would expect is that if a city does not want to participate in these deportations by identifying those in the country illegally that are committing additional crimes, you'll see a greater surge of federal agents, because the reason why these local officials don't have any power or real say in this is because it's a federal violation, as you and I know. Immigration law is a federal issue. If they can give Texas grief for standing up in the absence of the Biden administration can remind Governor Abbott over and over again with zero credibility that immigration is a federal responsibility, then why can't President Trump do the same in reverse, right? And say, look, we're going to come in and enforce the laws. It's a federal responsibilities. We don't need states to take any action in this. We're going to do our jobs on this. So now, one of the carrots that President Trump can use with sanctuary cities is, look, we want you to be a part of this because we provide you significant federal public safety grants, and we want those to continue. But if you're going to be an obstructionist to what we want to do, then the stick needs to come out and they need to withhold. My recommendation is withhold all federal public safety grants that go to sanctuary cities coming from DHS and DOJ. Now we're talking about billions of dollars that can be sent to ICE, that can be sent to CBP. Now you have a funding mechanism to do what really needs to be done here with respect to identifying these dangerous people, conducting these deportations in a prioritized manner, and leaving sanctuary cities out in the cold until they try and rejoin at some point in time civilized society.
Okay. I'm reading this morning that the majority of Americans support Trump's ideas on the border and also with deportation. So it will be very interesting to see
75%. 75%. Look, we said, I teach a national security class at the University of South Carolina, and we did an exercise where I said, I teach a course called The Politics of National Security. And I said, okay, let's kind of rate, and after the election, we'll see how we did, what issues we think are going to be in the top 3. And you had college students that just started studying this issue that had immigration and border security as the number 2. And that's exactly what it was. They got it right. They nailed it. So, for these sanctuary leaders to think that they're on the right side of this is just insane. I mean, the election results in sanctuary states prove that people are frustrated with this, even within those states, because it relates to safety and security.
Yeah. People want a good economy, and then they want to be safe to actually enjoy the money that they work so hard to make, right? Senator Rand Paul has come out against Trump in the last 24 hours and said, do not use the U.S. military for the border. Do not use the U.S. military for deportation. Why would he be against that? And would Trump use the actual military or start with the National Guard?
Yeah, so I heard this. I actually read it on the plane ride to DC. I don't agree with Senator Paul on use of the military at the border. That's historically been done by numerous previous administrations, including specifically use of the National Guard. So for observation and reporting, and logistics. So I don't see that being a problem. As far as any military participation in the interior of the United States, it's going to be logistics that they're going to be participating in. I anticipate them building housing locations, for example, on the way to being deported. I expect them to participate in ground transportation, air transportation, things like that. Do I think that the military is going to be paired up with Immigration and Customs Enforcement to conduct interior operations in the United States? Absolutely not. That's not going to happen. So the visualization that Senator Paul may have is just incorrect. It's not what the military does. I think you would have military leaders that would stand up and say, we're not going to get involved in this. And by the way, as an analogy, we've seen the lessons learned of using the military to be involved in immigration, border security with the cartels down in Mexico. President Calderon shifted from relying on his law enforcement agencies, primarily because of corruption at the state and local level, and turned it over to his military. And what did that do? It ended up corrupting the military institution, just like it did to the law enforcement institutions. So look, military is not to be used in the U.S. for law enforcement purposes, for operations like this, and that's not where you'll see them be used.
Okay, thank you for that insight.
Yeah.
I'm reading today that there are large groups of migrants rushing the border, hoping to get here before Trump is inaugurated. I'm also reading that current President Biden is loosening vetting to further allow more people in before he leaves office. Are either of these true?
Well, certainly about migrants making the journey to the U.S. while Biden's still in office, because there's never been a better time to come into this country, right? Remember, Ali Mayorkas in the first week of the administration said, we're not telling you not to come, we're just asking you don't come now. And the come now has been unleashed overwhelmingly for the past, 3.5 years. So the clock is ticking, and these migrants know that they've got a 95% chance that when they utter the right words, as instructed, by the way, by these NGOs that are receiving billions and billions of dollars from U.S. taxpayers, from the Biden administration, they utter the right words related to asylum, parole, temporary protective status, whatever it is, that they're going to get let into the country. And then, the wild goose chase happens. Again, another decision that's not setting the Trump administration up for an easier time of solving this issue when they come in, because Democrats just don't want this solved. They believe that borders should not exist, and this should be just one gigantic global community. And that's not the way you keep countries safe, and that's not the way a country, their own sovereignty exists. As far as the vetting has always been loose. And the reason why the vetting has been loose is because the vetting's only as good as the systems you're vetting against. And when we're encountering 180 different countries, the truth is we're either not able to obtain information from countries or they don't share it with us. So that means if these migrants have not come to the attention of intelligence or law enforcement agencies here in the US, we're not going to get a return on information. And that's the wild card. That's the greatest risk. That's what's keeping everybody up at night. Well, at least me. and some others I know. I don't know if it's keeping Ollie Mayorkas up at night. Doesn't seem to be the case. But I can tell you that there's no way to vet all of these people. I called it first when they first brought in the 5,000 refugees from Afghanistan. I said there was going to be a problem with it, that there was no way to vet them. I was told, you don't know what you're talking about. And a week later, after they were let into the country, the FBI was looking for 2,500 of them. So look, it's a problem. Everybody knows it's a problem. Anybody that's saying the truth is going to tell you there's no way that these people have been thoroughly vetted over the past 4 years. It's impossible.
Do you think President Trump will be, what's the word, instructed or counseled in cutting off funding to these NGOs that are largely driving a lot of the financial incentive of coming to the country?
Yeah, it's got to stop. I mean, it's basically the NGOs under the Biden administration have become an extension of DHS and HHS, Health and Human Services, and have been directly involved not only in the facilitation of this crisis, but in the execution of it. And when I say involved in the execution of it, they have been involved in the trafficking operations of these migrants and the almost 400,000 unaccompanied minors who are now missing in the interior of the United States. Let's not forget that part. That's another thing that ICE is going to go and do, is try and find these kids who are probably in some very, very bad situations.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when the Biden administration came in, stood down the 94 executive orders and said the Trump administration was just inhumane. We're going to be more humane. Well, at the end of 4 years of the Biden administration, who's actually been the inhumane administration? You've got thousands of migrants that have been hurt and killed making the journey to the United States, sexually exploited, raped, murdered, you name it, it's happening to them at the hands of the cartels and the coyotes. And it continues when they come into the United States. We know the sex trafficking continues because most of these migrants have loans to pay back because the cartels have facilitated the immigration into the United States at a cost, at a large cost. That's why the cartels are as powerful as they are right now, both operationally and financially, again, thanks to the NGOs and the Biden administration. And that's why I've also said, which you've heard President Trump agree with, that the cartels need to be designated as terrorist organizations. We need to bring more tools to the table. And Mexico's either going to work with us or they're not on this.
Okay. One of the words that I see so often in the news as I do my research is these train de Aragua Venezuelan gangs.
Yeah.
I'm reading that the crime among them is just getting worse and worse. Mm-hmm. How might Trump and Tom Homan deal with these dangerous gangs? And is it true that they now have strongholds in 16 of the 50 states?
Yes, it is true. Yes, Tren de Aragua, just like MS-13, are very dangerous. MS-13 out of Mexico and Tren de Aragua out of Venezuela. You know, isn't it nice that we're lowering the crime rates of the countries of origin for these gangs? Venezuela, crime rates down. El Salvador, crime rates down. Mexico, right? I mean, it's unbelievable that they don't have to deal with these gangs to the level that they had to because they're in the United States now. And 16 is not what I would say an accurate number. I would say they are in every major city in the United States. Let's remember that this is a money-making business. They're involved in all sorts of crimes, some that involve physical violence, as we've seen up to and including yesterday with the sentencing of Laken Riley's killer, who was a member of Tren de Aragua, and sentenced to life in prison with no parole, which I still don't think justice was served. I think the death penalty should have been allowed to be considered in that case. But Tom Homan and President Trump are going to have a tough job going after them. This could get very violent. And one of the other warnings that I gave early on in this crisis was that we were going to end up fighting this war when somebody got in and decided to handle the situation like President Trump. We'd be fighting this war internally here in the United States. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to be fighting it out in the cities, major cities primarily, within the United States. We know it's putting law enforcement in grave danger, and we know that it's putting the American public in grave danger. And, you know, Stephen, I tell everybody when they say, do you think this is going to keep growing? And the answer is yes, because the Biden administration continues to let everybody in, and it comes down to a matter of math. The more people like this that you're introducing into U.S. society, the greater chances become for encounters between these violent criminals and American citizens. So unfortunately, we are going to see this. They are preying upon American citizens. We see it whether it's fraud, whether it's retail crime, whether it's brute force robberies, whether it's home invasions, or whether it's violent individual attacks, as we've seen around the country against females. So this is a bad situation. But, you know, look, I think the ICE resources are going to be dedicated. They're going to be pulled away, just like CBP will, from this processing nonsense that's been allowed to go on. And I think they're going to dump out all of their headquarters, all of their administrative positions. I think a lot of agents are going to have to locate their handcuffs and get back out on the street and start doing the job that they were actually hired to do. And I think they want to do it.
I agree. I think that, you know, having to look the other way when the whole reason you signed up was to defend your country has been bad on the morale, of the agencies. Yeah. In our final minutes together, tell my audience about your book, Terrorists on the Border and in Our Country.
Well, thanks for that. We released it in May. It's been a bestseller. And I started writing it again about 6 months into the Biden administration, once we had a full understanding of what their positions were going to be on this issue. And right from the get-go, based on my experience, I knew we were going to be in some real trouble. And what I'd like to point out in the book, and I'm happy that we did, is that immigration and border security has not predominantly been a Republican issue, where Republicans have always been the hawks and Democrats haven't. Actually, it could be further from the truth. I think I point out several examples where Democrats like President Clinton were actually more hawkish on border security than, say, somebody like George W. Bush, who was a little more softer on immigration, not to the level of a President Biden, of course. This is unprecedented. We also share concerns. Both President Obama and President Trump used a program called Secure Communities, which prioritized criminals that were in the country illegally for deportation. They used to call President Obama the deporter in chief. The immigration advocacy groups did, because he was deporting close to 500,000 a year. So, you know, this is not a Republican Democrat thing. This is a common sense thing. And Homeland Security begins at our borders from a physical standpoint. And these laws need to be enforced, and it needs to be a layered approach. And we provide many of the recommendations, I'm happy to say, that we're hearing out of the Trump administration and from Tom Homan in a second term. So I hope the book contributed in a positive way to not only spurring the conversation and the concerns from the American people about this issue, because we did call it early. And I think as this was hitting home more and more for people, as this crisis was moving to their communities and neighborhoods, I think it became more of an issue. And so, you know, I'm glad that the book played a role in that. And I'm glad that the book provided some sound recommendations that I think we're going to see implemented here come January.
Well, I appreciate you writing that and consulting. I know you're in DC right now. Charles, thank you so much for
Thanks, Stephen.
all that you do for, your expertise on security and sharing that with leaders to keep all of us safe. I want to put a direct link to your book as well as your X account so that people can follow you online. Thank you again for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Stephen. Always good to be with you.